voxel level stuff, how you set up the thresholds and what this all means basically with the combination of a high threshold and a cluster level threshold. The high threshold is like a cluster forming thing where you just form clusters of voxels. And then for each cluster, you try to get a p-value that tells you basically how likely that is that cluster to have arising just from chance. I mean, either based on the size of the cluster, the number of voxels that comprise this cluster, or the mass of the cluster, which is the sum of the t statistics across all of the voxels within that cluster. I don't know. Am I misremembering? I already talked about this, right?
Yeah.
To you guys, you are familiar with this?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So that is that, and that's basically the random field theory stuff, and some of the like Eklund stuff that was on top of that is the way, and that's the typical way to do analysis at the voxel level, and we do that also on our FL pipeline basically for any voxel level analysis. And there's one peculiar set of analysis that only arises in connectivity results that have to do with this kind of like ROI to ROI. So if you are doing connectivity analysis, you instead of getting like a statistics for every individual voxel, you get a statistics for every individual connection between two regions, right? So if you have a pair of regions, then you have a connection between them, a functional connection. So everything is potentially at least functionally connected to everything else. And you get a t-value or statistics of how different that connection was between two different conditions, for example, conditions, or how different it is in one patient population versus one control population. So you still have a multiple comparison problem like you typically have in voxel level analysis, but instead of having multiple voxels, what you have now is multiple connections. And there is a bunch of techniques aimed at correcting for that multiple comparison issue in the case of these multiple connections. And they work very similar to these cluster level statistics at the voxel level, but they operate at the ROI level. And I had in the control box this particular display function that allows you to do these thresholding options, but it used to be very complicated GUI and very difficult to operate. So I've been working on trying to simplify it a little bit in the last few weeks. And one of the things, so I wanted to very briefly talk about how these thresholding options, how they work in this ROI, and also change them a little bit, added a couple of things from the last time I talked to you, last week. So that's why I wanted to talk again briefly about this. And the way this works is basically similar to the voxel level. You specify a high threshold and a cluster level threshold. The high threshold is for every connection instead of for every voxel, and the cluster threshold is for any type of group of connections instead of group of voxels. And the only kind of like peculiarity is that you have different type of ways of grouping connections. In voxels, there is no such thing as grouping them. Like cluster is a cluster of voxels. It's whatever neighboring voxels. A group of neighboring voxels that form a cluster. There's not many alternative ways. But when you have an ROI to ROI metrics, you have many different potential ways of identifying different groups of connections that you care about and you want to treat as a cluster. And I try to simplify all of those definitions into these type of three options that you have here. You can cluster them at the level of an ROI, for example, and that would mean that you group all of the connections that come from the same region. So if you have a particular region here, and you have multiple lines coming out of them, then that form a group of connections. And you can analyze whether this group of connections is significant or not, get a p-value associated with this group of connections, which is associated with this ROI. So basically, all of the connections that arise from the same region. That's one particular way of grouping ROIs, and you get the statistics, and the statistics that you get when you do this type of ROI level thresholding are one p-value for every region, right? So you get it for this particular region, you get whether that test that you were analyzing was significant, taking into consideration all of the connections that come out of this region.
Is that independent of direction? So
not really, because these connections are really bidirectional in the sense that they were actually computed using bivariate correlation. But if this region, if I just look at all of the things that are significant at whatever level I choose, I don't think the display that I have here, let me show you something that is actually significant so that it makes a little bit more sense when I'm displaying. Let me see if I have something here. There we go. I think each factor is quite significant. This was not. high number of regions. I need to rewind a little bit. It's going to take a few minutes. Let's see. Well, don't pay attention to the actual numbers. I'm actually in the middle of some stuff, so this is not actually any valid results. But anyway, even if it was, the statistics that you get basically actually for this particular region. So when you have a region and you are looking at whatever is significant, that region might show that as part of the group of connections that is significant, that is coming out of this region, that group of connections is significant. But whether this particular region, answering the question of whether this is bidirectional or not, whether this particular connection appears in the two directions or whether it appears in this, does it also means that if I look at this particular region, that connection will also be significant? The answer is not necessarily so, because the statistics are to do with the cluster itself. It tells you whether that cluster of connections is significant. It doesn't really mean that each one individual connection within that cluster is going to also appear in the.
So my question was not necessarily about whether it's bidirectional between ROIs, but whether the significance of that connection, of that ROI to all other connections depends on positive and negative connectivity.
Right. No, it's grouped together basically. So all of the connections, as you see here in this example, is in red are the positive connections, or the ones that are showing the positive difference. I don't know, but let's say I'm looking at correlation with age. So in this case, positive means that it's positive correlated. So these connections increase with age, and negative means that these connections decrease with age. So, and when it gives you the significance of the results, it tells you the significance of this group of connections, where they are strongly. It doesn't care about the sign of those connections. That's where it's like an F-test, where you're looking at whether the sum of all those statistics is significant. Is kind of like doing the same thing. In this case, it's considering all of these super-threshold connections, and it's computing the mass across all of them. So it's summing the absolute value of the T statistics, and it's determining whether that mass associated with this ROI, that mass of connection strength, is actually significant or not compared to the. So it's bidirectional in that sense. So that's kind of like ROI level thresholding, that you define the cluster, the groups, clusters of connections by all of the ROIs from the same region. Then you can also define them using this. I should probably run it. Okay, I'll talk about it in a second.
Do all subjects. You just do the effective all subjects.
Right. All subjects, just like that.
I don't know. If you wanted to get something that has results.
Something that has significant no matter what. Right. Now, this is only because I've been playing with the randomization procedure to actually square values or not. Because I was working with the threshold-free cluster enhancement. That has one particular way of that's pretty cool. That has one particular way of combining the extent and the strength of the results. And they suggest that you should be looking at the square of the T statistics and the square root of the cluster sizes. That's because that combination appeared to be more significant. So I was considering for the definition of the mass, when looking at the mass level of statistics for a cluster, we should also square the T statistics. So I was playing with that, and that's why all of my already computed results are using the wrong permutation level analysis. So they don't. I just need to run them to get them up to this. But anyway, these clusters are very big, but clusters looking easy. I'm just looking at what is significant in terms of the actual average connectivity. So everything is going to be significant in here, no matter whether I run the statistics considering the square or not. So this looks fun. Anyway, So the ROI level of statistics is for every individual region, as I said before, and the cluster level statistics are for groups defining in this is a method developed by Zaleski, and it's called spatial pairwise clustering. And it determines it forms a cluster of connections where you find two connections that either the seed or the target are spatially adjacent. It's kind of like to try to follow the similarity. Let me show you an example that is not too large. So yeah, something like that. So basically, when you have a group of connections, all of these connections form a cluster basically because they come from nearby regions and they go to nearby regions. And nearby is defined by position in this ring. And the position in this ring can be defined by different criteria. It could be just purely spatially, where two regions are kind of like actually nearby in their anatomical location, or it could also be functionally, where two regions are similar in the pattern of connectivity between those regions and the rest of the ring. In this case, we are using the functional definition of nearby. So basically, the regions are grouped by typically networks. So, for example, all of these are kind of like the 4-node network regions because they show like are regions that are relatively close together in terms of the similarity of functional connectivity profiles. And these are all sort of variable regions. And this is, I don't know, let me see, this is all essential gyres, primary auditory areas, and central particle, and secondary auditory areas. And then you have, I don't know, salience networking here. This is just a way of grouping regions functionally. And in this case, basically, the neighborhood is also defined functionally. Basically, we define these regions are together because they are functionally similar in a way. So when you have these groups of connections, they are grouped because they are between regions that are relatively functionally similar. So this forms a cluster, and for that particular cluster of connections that comprise all of these connections, and then you have statistics that tell you how significant that cluster of connections is to appear arising by chance. So basically, this is how you report the results for this level of clusters of connections. And this was ROI. This is the clusters for the spatial pairwise clustering. And then the last one is another alternative that is also defined by Zaleski method. Actually, a different paper, which is called network-based statistics. And in this case, I don't like this method particularly much because it tends to give you a network of everything. But basically, this is a way of defining clusters or groups of connections, and the way they are defined. Let me see if I can make it so it doesn't give you just one single cluster. Try to run the statistics before this. Yeah. It's going to take a minute to do it. So switch to anything else. Let me just see if I can switch to. Let me see if I can do that. Okay, so while this runs, it will take a minute. A cluster of connections in this case is defined by a subgraph. So basically, you consider this. I don't know if you are familiar with this kind of like graph theory stuff. But every region is considered a node. You consider it like a place in a graph, and every connection that is suprathreshold that is higher than this particular significant level that you define at the connection level defines a connection between two nodes. And then that defines a graph, right? Where you have nodes and connections among them. And within those graphs, you can define subgraphs of connected sets. So you could, if you think of a graph of a lot of nodes and you draw a few lines between them, you can get situations where you have subgraphs. And subgraphs are basically subregions of that graph that are not connected to each other. You have a graph where the nodes are connected to each other. You can find a path between all of the nodes within that subgraph. But then you have a different subgraph in here that is located that no node in this graph jumps to this graph. There's no connection between any node in this subgraph and any node in this subgraph. So that's how you define different subgraphs within a graph by having groups of nodes that are connected to each other but are not connected among the different subgraphs. And that's the way that these networks are defined in the Zaleski nomenclature. So a cluster of connections is basically all of the connections that are within a given subgraph of the entire graph of potential connections between all of the regions. And if you for that you need to define the threshold relatively conservative in order to be able to have multiple subgraphs, because otherwise you are going to have just a single graph. like this is happening still. Because so it needs to be
Sorry.
But yes, because I follow Saul suggesting to actually try to show something that is very, very significant. In any way, you can imagine there might be a potential scenario where all of these regions in here are all connected to each other in a way or related to each other, and then but none of the regions in here there is any line to all of any of the regions in here, but there are connections between those. So those would form different subgraphs. And those are the different clusters that the network level statistics will show, basically. And they will give you given a particular statistical value and p-values really each subgraph within your whole network. So those are the three levels of clusters of regions. And of course, you can also threshold by none, where you don't use any type of cluster level threshold. You just use a connection level thresholding to determine whether something is significant. And you are looking at individual connections instead of groups of connections. And this is kind of similar to at the voxel level analysis when you were looking at if you just select none in here, you just set a value of 1 so that you have no thresholding at the cluster level, and then you are only thresholding at the level of the individual voxels. So you can do also the same here. If you don't want to threshold by groups of connections, you can also threshold and try to make inference more individual connections themselves. And this is the less sensitive typical way of doing it.
And you would want to use the FDR correction.
Right, and in that case, if you do like a non in here, because the combination of it works in the same way as it does in here. When you do a combination of high threshold and cluster level threshold, you just care about this one being SDR corrected or family wise corrected. You need to apply a correction at this level, but you don't need to apply a correction at that level because all that you are going to be making inference about this level and this is all that it requires. But if you don't threshold at the cluster level, then you need to still apply some form of integer comparison correction. So for that, you typically want to do SDR correction at the height level. So the same thing kind of applies here. If you are using any of these cluster level thresholding options and this is corrected or like an FDR corrected p-value, then you are fine. Whatever significant clusters of connections that you find in the results, those are properly corrected for multiple comparisons. But if you choose the non-option here to actually don't apply any sort of cluster level correction at these results, then all of the significant results that appear here are only based on this thresholding, so you need to use the FDR thresholding option in that case, so to make sure that you have a proper multiple comparison correction for whatever results you are showing here. Okay, and that's it. Basically, that's what I wanted to talk about. This is kind of like a specific which only has to do with connectivity analysis, because it's for this ROI to ROI connection metrics since it's relatively similar to the thresholding options that you already know about, and it's just something that we might run into when we run connectivity analysis. So it's running right now. I thought I might just share with the class. So everybody has seen this.
I had just one follow-up question.
Sure.
That came up as I was doing it. If you do the cluster level thresholding correction, does it matter what your connection level threshold is? Or is it the same? Because since this is doing like a non-parametric statistics.
Exactly. So it's doing a non-parametric statistics. It actually takes into consideration the high threshold that you use. So I think this has been done for this level. So when you run it at this level, it's going to be so well, it works in the same way as in here, basically. So when you are doing like an FDR correction cluster level threshold in here, let's use the non-parametric version. So it works in the same way as I'm doing that. Well, when you run the non-parametric version, which is everything that we are running here mostly is non-parametric, right? All of it is non-parametric. When you run the non-parametric statistics, they are run differently, basically at different time. Every time that you change this threshold, they are going to be rerun because they are based on this threshold. So whatever cluster forming threshold you choose is going to have different properties of the resulting clusters, right? So if you use a very liberal cluster, then you are going to have a lot of clusters and they're going to be typically very large. And if you use a relatively conservative high threshold, then you are typically going to have even by chance there's low number of clusters and relatively small. So the properties, the statistical properties that by chance the null hypothesis, the statistical properties of the clusters that result are going to depend on this high threshold. So the parametric permutation analysis are actually run many times and they're actually using whatever high threshold you use to estimate the properties of the resulting cluster specific to that particular high threshold that you chose. So because of that, it doesn't matter which criteria you use for this high threshold. It could be an uncorrected value. It could be an actual statistical value. You can say all of the T statistics above 3. It doesn't have to be an actual p-value, and it doesn't have to be corrected. It's some arbitrary or somehow arbitrary high threshold that you determine, cluster forming threshold, that is going to be used to determine what you call a cluster. It doesn't need to be corrected. And the same thing happens in here. When you're using all of these cluster level thresholding options, you don't need to use any sort of corrected p-statistics, corrected p-values at the connection level. You can be any criterion, any threshold that you want, either uncorrected values or actual t-statistic values, or whatever is fine.
Okay, thanks.
Sense?
Yep.
Any other questions with this? Any other topics or things that you might want to cover, or should we call it a day? Or also, if you have any suggestions about what things in particular you might find the thing might be useful for me to talk about for a few minutes for future meetings, like things that might be unclear in some of the stuff that we already discussed, or things that feel free to make suggestions as to, because we have pretty much covered most of the stuff. So if not all of the kind of like basic stuff. So I don't know exactly where to go in terms of like more didactic sessions for this. I don't know if you have any particular suggestions for what I think it might be useful to learn a little bit more about it, talk a little bit more about
something that doesn't actually involve, or it's not specific to the FL pipeline, that might be just some interesting information to have in a presentation or something, is kind of going over the theory behind the different types of corrections or the different types of statistical analyses for fMRI. So the random field theory for the parametric statistics, and then what's actually happening. I don't know if this is if everybody's interested in this, but
yeah,
I know
yeah, definitely.
And I know there's a bunch of Friston papers that explain all of them, but sometimes
I will go to a level of detail that is ridiculous. Yeah, I can give a summary version of that, and then I can point you to the papers that go to that in more detail. Yeah, that's cool. That's interesting.
Yeah, and why the corrections that we use, do what they do or are valid or things like that.
Okay, that's cool. And I can also organize it because I've been working with the threshold-free cluster enhancement, which is going to be yet another way of doing this type of thresholding options for fMRI analysis. When I finish that, I can just do a little talking a little bit about the theory behind that and how these different thresholding options work and why this threshold-free is actually such a good idea. I don't know. I'll mix it with that as well.
That also might be a good series of themed journal clubs too.
That's true.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. What was it?
Oh, I was saying, sorry, I'm nowhere near the mic. I was saying that might be a good series of themed journal club where everyone does a different statistical metric or statistical fMRI correction over a series of weeks, and they present a journal club on it.
Yeah. I think the basic idea is that might be a good topic to do at the speech Wednesday journal club meeting. Is that right?
Yeah, and just saying that instead of trying to do them all in 1 week, that several people over a course of several weeks could sort of split up and do one a week, and over time we would get a lot of, I think, depth from different people.
You mean more methodological papers on fMRI methods for the journal club type of thing?
Yeah, just like have a themed series. Because, Journal Club right now, it's sort of whatever is important and whoever's presenting life. And so it might be nice to have like a 2 month of a theme where we split up, the 4 or 5 most relevant papers in this area and everyone presents one.
And what type of themes are you thinking about?
Well, I was saying for starters, just for to get to Saul's questions for the differences between different types of fMRI statistical corrections. So like that would be a good.
Yeah, I think that could be cool. I would worry that it would take a long time to get through the literature in that way.
Yeah, I was thinking dedicate a month to it, and
Yeah.
then 4 weeks we could have some. I guess Journal Club's only every other week, but
Right.
have someone discuss like 2 papers a week essentially, and then we can get through a lot in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah. I also like the idea of Alfonso being able to, because I feel like if each of us could go through a paper and try to figure it all out and explain it to everyone, but I feel like at the end of the day we'd be asking, hey Alfonso, is that the right interpretation? But maybe that's good. Maybe that's good for us to do that, to like try to like figure it out one way and then get some feedback. I don't know.
Well, there is also the plan of Alfonso explaining it all to us. That is also a valid.
No, but I like the original idea. I think it's also a good practice to actually go through some of these kind of like more obscure papers and try to make sense of it, because it's. I'm afraid that I'm making it too simple for you guys. So it's good that you do some hard work as well in this sense.
Does anybody else have thoughts on this?
I'm interested in the topic. I like the idea of us. So I kind of go back to something we talked about. We've had some of these discussions, like the theory, the theory for the how we model the data and interpret it. And we've talked about having something like as part of the pipeline or our documentation. I guess Alfonso's slides, and maybe we add to that, work on that more, and try to build in practical examples from the lab. I would really like that. And if seems like a way to expand on that, to move it into the correction. So we had something you're talking about where we go over, Alfonso runs through some things with us. I think that would be great, and to have that as a resource for the lab going forward would be fantastic. And then if we connect it, so I think this idea of connecting it to actual studies is good, but we could also we could, as a first pass, we could limit it to our studies, having Alfonso talk to us about it. And but I mean, I guess Alfonso is doing a lot of work here, so at some point we talk about expanding things. So maybe that's something that we could do in return for him, would be for the stuff that we've already gone over, going through his slides and adding like changing the examples to like task contrast examples in the lab, and making some edits. And that's a resource that he can then use on the road, but he can go through and then tell us, okay, well, this is not right. This is right. So maybe that's what that's the way we could do a little give and take here.
Sounds great to me.
So as soon as people's schedules open up, that's what you should do.
Yeah, right.
All right. Is that how we want to leave it for today? I mean, I guess just to wrap that up, having you discuss some of this stuff, the theory behind the correcting would be great. Right.
I'll prepare something for next week if you want. I think I should have. I should have finished the threshold-free stuff, and I'll talk about thresholding options just for voxel level stuff, just the theory behind it a little bit, and I'll present also the threshold free, and I'll show you how to run that on the voxel level stuff. But I won't present any particular examples or anything like that, and I'll leave that to you guys to think about a second level analysis, like examples of analysis examples that might be relevant to our experiments that we might try to add to the list of second level examples that we are thinking of. So this is just going to be purely thresholding without any regard to modeling or defining this actual second level models. Does it sound okay?
Yeah, I won't be here the next 2 weeks, but I'm happy to watch on videos.
Okay, we'll record those, no problem.
Yeah, and I think I'll be around next week, but there's I probably won't be around Boston next week beyond the first couple of days, but I think I'll be around. But it might be good just to take a survey, make sure people are going to be around on Monday of next week.
Yeah.
Sounds good. If there is many people missing, we can just reschedule and not enough rush as well. So, okay. No problem. And if I don't get to actually finish the DFC stuff as well, I'll also reschedule because I want to put those two together because it's going to make it simpler.
Okay. All right, guys. Okay. Thanks for looking me up. Sorry about that. I kind of missed the boat there. All right. Catch you later.
Bye.
Bye.